Welcome back to the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast Spotlight. I'm your host, Alan Hall. Today we're sharing bonus content from Tuesday's discussion, additional insights that we couldn't fit into the main episode. We're diving deeper into the economic realities threatening wind energy companies and the precarious situation at TPI Composites.
Welcome to Uptime Spotlight, shining light on wind energy's brightest innovators. This is the progress powering tomorrow.
So when we're talking energy, everything is difficult. Wind and solar can be difficult to make money in, but some of the discussion about moving back to coal or moving back to older sources of electricity generation, they're money losers too.
Yeah, probably even more efficient money losers and on a larger scale, at least wind and solar, you can lose money a little bit at a time, and you don't lose money on the operation. It's all in the capital cost, whereas coal can lose money every single day that the plant operates. So I guess that's true. It's not as bad as that.
So is there a industry fix, or is there a hope for the future? Because right now I don't see it.
I was reading this book for a little while and I stopped reading because it had some good ideas, but it wasn't like totally rigorous in its exploration of all the ideas. I think it's called The Price is Wrong or something like that. And it's about how it's not possible to have a renewables industry that isn't subsidized by the government. And I think that there's some truth to that, but I would replace that it's impossible to have a renewables industry if it's not subsidized. Rather say it's impossible to have an electricity system that's not subsidized in some way by the government. Just recognize that, and maybe we don't need to fight that, but it is always turns so tribal that everyone's arguing over who's got the more subsidies or who's more dependent on subsidies. It'd be easier if we could all, get on the same page about climate change and just acknowledge what we needed to do. But, if wind and solar power never came along and we didn't care about climate change, then we'd still be subsidizing, coal and gas and all the transmission and, infrastructure you need to transport those fossil fuels around. We'd still be subsidizing because people still need electricity and still get upset if it's, so expensive that you are stuck, choosing whether you want to eat this week or heat your home this week. So,
well, is it because electricity was late to the game? The railroads sort of blew through the United States and everywhere else in the world because it was easy.
They missed Australia, but yeah, would have been nice.
But here in America, the railroads pretty much owned most of America very quickly and got it done before there was any real feedback like there would be today. As soon as you want to put a transmission tower in somebody's farm field, huge uproar. States are involved, senators are involved, the government's all over it. There's committee meetings, everything gets really slowed down versus 1860s. It just happened.
But I think the difference as well, it's not like transmission didn't have these obstacles the first time around, right? When cities or towns were getting electricity for the first time because there were transmission lines going to them, then it was more obvious what the need was. Whereas now they're like, I already have electricity, and they don't want to be disturbed further when the case isn't as obvious to them for what the benefit will be to them.
Is it such that the general public doesn't realize that their survival depends upon electricity on some measure? We were just driving, Claire and I, our producer, were just driving through a certain part of the Midwest, and we were noticing there were no houses. And then it became obvious, well, there's no power to this part of the country. There are no transmission lines. There are roads, but there are no transmission lines until you get to a railroad track. And then there are power lines running alongside the railroad tracks. So the railroad and electricity go together, and wherever those two sort of meet, there is a little town. But outside of that, zero. That happens on a bigger scale. If you don't have electricity to power your industry, your cities, your communities, you're really in a world of hurt competing against the rest of the world. When do we realize that? Isn't that why China is going so fast, so hard to electrify? Because it brings civilization, advanced civilization. India is trying to do the same thing. But it seems like in some aspects we just go, well, I don't need it. You do need it. Your kids need it. Your grandkids need it.
But it's a different argument you're trying to make because, I doubt that there's many towns in the US that aren't connected to the electricity grid. There's quite a few in Australia, but, with microgrids and stuff like that. So maybe that's a bit of a special case. But what you're talking about in most places like Australia and the US, you're not talking about getting electricity to places for the first time, which is what they are doing in China and in India when they're rolling out new renewables infrastructure, like big transmission lines to connect up good, both those countries have high voltage DC, long connections that are electrifying parts of the country that haven't been connected to the grid before. So they're more... The people there are going to be more like people were 100 years ago when they were getting connected for the first time in America or Australia or wherever. The benefit to them is obvious. I do think that it's like with most new technologies where you got to find the niches where people like it's a real solution for them. That's the first place to roll it out, and people who aren't really suffering don't see as much need to change until the technology gets like so much better.
Who are the proponents, the loud, vocal proponents to bring more electricity to New York City or to Los Angeles or to Houston? I don't hear them. Those voices aren't nearly as loud as the voices that are saying, we don't need wind, we don't need solar, we're totally fine the way that we are. There is a very quiet opposition or proponents of electricity, I would say, versus the opposition, which are very vocal about we don't need wind and solar. I think they totally do. I don't understand where they're even coming from in terms of big picture.
In the big cities, you kind of maybe hit from two ends because there's this one kind of one group of people who are climate concerned, and so they do want renewable energy. However, they think that the solution is that you just need to use less electricity. And so I think there's like a really large proportion of city populations of people who are cared about climate change that think that you can solve it by consuming less. All the things that are left over are, like little incremental things that don't add up to anything like what we're going to need to have everyone move to electric vehicles and have everyone move off the gas network and onto heat pumps for heating. There's so many huge chunks of load that need to be added in order to decarbonize. And I think that the half of the general population, like non-expert population that should be on the side of the energy transition, I don't think they realize that. We've been really, really conditioned to believe that if it's not, if it's not hurting, it's not working. So it's like you have to suffer as a condition for a solution to be plausible. So I think that, there's a lot of people that are really obsessed with individual action and how we've just got to convince people that they should, do all those little things. And I'm not sure they're aware of the extent of the problem.
I think you're right about that. And been listening to a couple of podcasts while working that are still focused on the climate action slant, I'll call it, to drive people to do something about their electricity or their coal factory or whatever they got going. But that argument is just a losing argument today in the climate we're in. You're not competing against someone who's going to have a discussion with you about climate. You're competing about someone who is trying to have an economic argument, a strength argument versus a weakness argument. So you're talking on the sidelines about climate when your world economies are colliding. It just seems like the language needs to shift a little bit to focus in on what is going to move people to some sort of consensus.
This also goes back to my whole thing with, industry trade associations or lobby groups, because they are very much focused on politics and making everything into a political argument, as opposed to leveraging the people that actually have the economic focused argument and data to be able to support the position. And we're just not hearing from the right people that have the right knowledge and information. And it's not just exclusive to the US. This, has happened in Europe. I'm sure Rosie can speak to how the degree to which this has happened in Australia as well. But the reality is the people with the real knowledge and information that people actually need to be able to meaningfully change their argument and change habits and change behavior and thought patterns, they get drowned out by the people who shout the loudest or who are politically connected.
Sure, but that's been true for time immemorial. What I think is happening at the minute is, if everybody wants to talk about electricity is power, basically what we're saying, electricity is economic power, then you want as much electricity as you could possibly generate. Are you going to spend twice as much to do it, or are you going to do it as cost efficiently as you can? Wind and solar are going to be those two answers, plus battery being the third. That's going to be the lowest cost way to do it if you're trying to grow your economic power relative to all your economic neighbors. That's the way to do it. So why are we having a discussion about we're going to go back to coal in the United States? And we just drove through coal country a couple of days ago. Why are we having a discussion about going back to coal? Because it's so expensive. Why would we do that?
It's really weird because, renewables didn't kill coal in the US, right? It was gas.
Gas killed coal. Yeah, oh yeah, gas killed coal, for sure. Well, coal killed coal because you don't want to live next to a coal generation plant. You really don't, especially 30, 40 years ago. You totally didn't before the emissions equipment was installed. Not nice. Does that make sense? We're just not pushing. If everybody's talking power, let's talk power. Let's talk cheap power. Let's go. Let's buy TPI. Come on, Rosemary. Let's go.
I've got about $2.50 spare at the moment. So if you think that when it gets to the point where that can give me a stake, then happy to jump in.
What kind of management, Rosemary, would you put into a TPI? Would you put in a engineering-focused management team, or are you putting in a development team, or are you putting in just a pure, raw, old-school manufacturing sort of management and system? What does that type of business require?
I think that there's a real tension that makes that like an unanswerable question, and why it's the whole industry is struggling, and not just one or two companies based on their decisions, because you need, in the long term, you need a good product. It means you need a good engineering team to design it and, maintain a whole lot of institutional knowledge in-house, and to be able to maintain, deal with warranty claims and make sure that you don't have more in the future. But that's super expensive. And the reality of today is that the cost, what you can charge for a wind turbine blade is just, it's too low to support the kind of engineering that it actually needs. And so, that's why no one can make the equation work, to have the product sufficient and to make enough money to stay in business. I don't know. And the way I've seen it for probably like the last nearly decade that I've been saying this is I just feel like a bunch of companies are going to go bankrupt over not being able to, whoever has the first, huge warranty claim that they just can't support and they go bankrupt. Few of them happen, and probably people will start, some Chinese companies will kind of rush in to fill the void as well. But at the end of the day, you're still going to end up, having to move through this and pay for the engineering. You just, like in 20 years' time, it can't be anywhere else unless we just didn't have a whole lot of wind energy growth.
Let's talk about wind energy growth for a minute. With the shift in terms of production tax credits going away in the United States, and wind has to stand on its own 2 feet discussion that's happening at the moment, when you remove those production tax credits and investment tax credits, wind is still cheaper, solar is still cheaper than pretty much any other. Well, no, it is cheaper than any other power source. Does that then, when they do that comparison, when you start to say, oh, well, I'm going to put a gas-fired system in 5 years from now, I'm going to pay a fortune for it because everybody wants to do that versus just buying some wind turbines and solar panels and getting the same result. Does that allow wind and solar then to raise prices where they become more profitable, more stable over time?
I actually think no, because there's so many companies that are so used to, just slashing costs so much. I just think there's just too many. There's too many companies.
Too many companies in it.
Yeah, and some that can go for at least a period of time making a loss on every product they sell. But there's so many companies, and especially if you include China in that, they're just I don't know. It's just not viable to me to see how which company is going to be the one that starts charging more.
Are you able to have an independent blade company anymore, or do you need to be attached to an OEM?
I don't see why that. The reason why that there were independent blade companies to start with was because people wanted to have a more secure supply chain, so that if something happened with one of the factories and they've still got another option to fulfill all the orders that they've got for a certain platform. And I don't see that changing. The fundamental reason for it. So. I don't think anything's changed there.
This also goes back to the argument of, does an industry flourish when it's vertically integrated, or does an industry flourish when you've got all these separate little companies?
It's more distributed.
Exactly. A distributed model for supply chain. And right now we're in that phase of an industry growth where if you want to be profitable, vertical integration's pretty much the way to go. It's also why it's slightly confounding why GE bought LM in the first place, because they, brought them in because they wanted, to vertically integrate it. But then they said, oh, but you're going to keep selling blades to everybody else, and then we're going to go use TPI and maybe some other companies to source blade designs and blades for specific makes and models of turbines. So why would you vertically integrate a capability like blade manufacturing and then not fully leverage it?
You know what? At the time that they were purchasing LM and I was working there, no one could understand it, and we kind of came to the conclusion, well, we're engineers, not business people, so presumably makes sense to a team of MBAs from GE, but now I kind of think that it did. It wasn't that we didn't understand; it's that it didn't really make sense the way that they did it, at least. I don't think that I think that the team at the time really did intend to keep LM doing basically what it did, and they didn't quite realize how much OEMs wouldn't really like it. They didn't like the vibe, even though, I can tell you, really, really things didn't change so much at LM in the first few years. But to an external OEM's perspective, now they're buying blades from their competitor, so it doesn't really feel like as much diversification as it feels like giving away all of your trade secrets to a competitor. So I think that they underestimated how much that vibe would exist.
What was the GE drive to change management and change culture at LM? At other acquisitions that I've been around with GE, instantaneously, the old company is over, the new company is here, management changes, structure changes, they're relatively quick at doing it, and then you're part of the larger GE almost immediately. At LM, it never seemed to kick in that way, even though they were selling blades to other companies besides, obviously, GE. But that hadn't changed GE at other facilities. They would still just take it over and call it GE, change the name on the building, and boom, it is now a GE facility, and run with it. Why did they not do that at LM? And was it more of a just cultural difference, or was it a financially driven decision?
I would suggest it was cultural.
Think it's cultural?
I think so, to be honest, because they with the Danish management, I don't think they wanted to immediately make a significant amount of changes because they knew that LM would lose customers if they immediately kind of vertically integrated LM as now a GE company. I think they wanted to maintain that brand identity. And so more than a financial thing, I think it was a cultural thing and a brand thing to start with. But I think that ultimately ended up being potentially the wrong thing. Either they could have bought and owned it and operated it as a separate, literally separate, just an owned entity of GE Vernova, but it maintained the brand and their, operational philosophy forever. But they owned it, and then it was like, well, we're going to integrate it. We're not going to integrate it. They started exchanging all this IP, all the GE Vernova blade technology IP got assigned to LM and then got assigned back to GE Vernova. I mean, so I don't think they really managed that well.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, right? You can't predict that. But I'm now curious, Rosemary, because I've listened to you describe LM quite a bit, and now I know a lot more about Danish culture and Danish companies than 5 years ago, clearly. If GE had come in and had been, we're clearinghouse, we're going to vertically integrate this company into the greater GE, would the employees revolted? Would they have lost the critical staff that they needed to run the place?
I don't think so. Where are they going to go?
No, well, then there's Vestas. There's other. At the time, there were a lot of places to go.
Yeah, and I mean, people were moving around, but you're talking about hundreds of engineers all at once in the town Coling that most of LM engineers work in. Is 60,000 or something in that area. So yeah, it's not. And Danish people hate to move house.
But it's an American company coming into Denmark. There's that label that goes along with it. Besides the cultural aspects, just having the moniker, the big meatball on the side of the building, would mean something to Denmark.
Yeah, but I don't think that they would have seen a sudden rush. I think that they would have seen a little bit higher than normal attrition. That's my gut feeling.
Okay, because I just feel like in some aspects, GE did try to set things up in certain ways to make it run in a certain fashion. In other ways, they didn't. They just left it alone.
Yeah, no, I think that they took over with one idea and then the GE management changed and had a different idea, because it doesn't make any sense that they came in, this huge company of 300,000 plus global employees, bought a company of about 10, 15,000 at the time. And then for all of the stuff where it was duplicated between, except for some corporate stuff, I'm sure that some corporate stuff got, LM's version of it got slashed and GE took over. But for the bulk of the stuff that mattered to the company, it was the tiny company whose team stayed and the GE one left. Like, there wasn't a GE blade team anymore after they bought LM. They now worked for LM. And, across the board for everything technical, that's how it was. And then 5 years later, they're like, actually, no, now we're going to get rid of the LM team and have the GE one. I mean, why would you do that to get rid of the small amount of in-house expertise you had one day, and then a few years later just flip and no, we're going back to they didn't retain. You can't just get rid of a team and then 5 years later be like, okay, now the team starts up again. Like, everyone wasn't just there hibernating, waiting for GE to tell them that they could work for them again. So obviously you would never go into that without being your long-term plan. So that's why I'm pretty sure that they changed their mind.
You could do that if TPI exists. Without TPI, I don't think they make the moves with LM like they've done.
Because they've got the backup.
Yes. And now that TPI is on the rocks, now I wonder if they're rethinking the LM.
Maybe GE will buy TPI and rinse and repeat.
Well, I don't think they're going to. They may be forced into doing it just to keep the production line going. That happens quite a bit in business where you buy your suppliers to keep the supply chain going. But the LM it felt like for probably a year now that GE was going to try to sell LM off in pieces or whatever they were going to do. Does that stop? Does GE think, no, 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 I don't want to do that because I need a factory in North Dakota that makes blades. I need blade factories. I own blade factories. I don't want to lose blade factories. I don't want to sell them off right now because I'm concerned about my other supplier, TPI, not being here in a year.
But it's too late. They've already, LM has like 1 or 2 factories left. I mean, some of them are GE factories, but some of them have been just closed or sold to competitors. So it's too late for that. That's why I like I said, when the sale happened, we all assumed that these, you learn something in an MBA, and that gives you kind of an insight into how to manage these things, because like it obviously is not like to the average worker on the floor, it doesn't make any sense how that you can close something and then realize it was a bad idea and then just open it again. Like it's obvious that it can't work like that, but that's just what we see continuing to happen. So I'm questioning if an MBA even makes you the smartest person in the company.
So here's a message to all of our listeners, by the way. Particularly if you're an engineer, if somebody's making a business move and they can't explain it to you in a way that you as an engineer understand it, like Rosie just explained, then they are making a really bad business decision and you need to get out of that ship.